Hello everyone, welcome to the course Basics of Branding. In this course, you will be learning about the basics of design theory, elements of typography, color theory, the basics of image making, as well as key elements for any successful brand identity curation. To start off with, we'll be talking about typography. When we talk about typography, let the first thing that we should differentiate between is fonts versus typeface. There's a common confusion because most people use these terms interchangeably. However, there are key differences. So, usually, what most people refer to as fonts is actually a typeface. For instance, Times New Roman is a font that is very famous, most people know about, but it's not actually a font. Times New Roman is a typeface. However, the exact type of Times New Roman you're using, for instance, regular or italic or bold, that is a font. So, in summary, Times New Roman is a typeface, whereas Times New Roman regular is a font. Moving on, there are basically two different categories of fonts. Most or all of the fonts fall under these two categories. There are serif fonts, and then there are sans serif fonts. Serif fonts are usually uh, during the times of print publishing and when printing presses were invented, sans serif fonts were used 100% of the times. Sans serif fonts are a bit more modern. Serif refers to the elements that protrude out of each alphabet. So you see the extended part of each of these serif alphabets. That's what the serif refers to. However, the sans serif in French, sans refers to, it means without basically. So without serif fonts. These fonts are more modern. The two categories, there are different applications for each of these. For instance, when you are reading a novel, let's say, the words, the font size is very small. So the fonts need to be legible, they need to be clean, they need to be easily readable. That's why it's really important that when you are creating a copy or there is a lot of text, it's better to use sans serif fonts. However, when you are creating headlines or something that is more, let's say, larger in size, a bigger font, or you are creating a title for a post or whatever, sans serif fonts, well, they work as well, but you could also use serif fonts depending on the type of design that you are creating. Now let's talk about terminology. There are a lot of different terminologies. Not all of them are crucial, but we'll go over some of the more important ones. The X height basically refers to the the height of letter X for any font when it is not capitalized. The baseline refers to the the starting point for any font, the baseline from where the font grows. Uh, Speaking of the X height, there are ascenders and then there are descenders. Ascenders refers to the alphabets or the characters that reach beyond the X height, above the X height to a certain point. And then descenders refer to the elements of a font that extend below the X height. Now, apart from ascenders and descenders, there's also the cap height. The cap height, as the word says, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's the height of the capitalized versions of letters for any font. Now, there are other things such as the tail and the ball and the loop and terminal, even though it's better to know these, but the fundamental elements include the kerning, which we'll be discussing later on, the descender, the X height, the baseline, and the cap height. Moving on, we've got different font properties. As we discussed earlier, there's the typeface, that is Montserrat, which is another very famous typeface. And then if we're referring to the font, the exact font that I'm using here is Montserrat Regular. Moving on, we've got different weights or variation. Usually, uh, historically, there have been two most common weights, that is the regular and the bold versions of each font. However, uh, since everything is moving on digitally, we've got fonts that have multiple variations. For instance, here we've only got regular and bold variations, but there are fonts that come in light or semi-regular or semi-bold, medium, extra bold, even black variations. So the variations can go up to 7 or 8 different variations for each font, depending on the weight. Next, we've got character or tracking. Character and tracking is very easy. It basically refers to the horizontal distance between each character or each alphabet. Then we've got kerning. In order to explain kerning, we'll have to zoom in for a little bit. Kerning also refers to the horizontal distance, but there are key differences between tracking and kerning. So if you look closely, the difference between R and A is less than the difference between K and I, for instance. Kerning refers to this distance that can vary between different characters or different alphabets that can also vary between different fonts. So if you look at kerning, it's very clear that the distance between P and O is different from the distance between Y and P. That is what kerning basically refers to. Anyways, moving on, we've got the measure and drag. Now, measure and drag refers to the shape of a paragraph. We all know that when you're reading, the text should be readable, it should be easy on the eyes, the paragraphs should be formulated very well according to the topic that they're discussing, and that they're easy to understand. Uh, it's better to usually cut down the paragraphs into readable bits. Now, measure and drag. Measure basically refers to the horizontal distance of any body of text. So, the horizontal distance here refers to measure, and the vertical distance here refers to the drag. The shorter the vertical distance is, so sometimes there are two columns, for instance, like in newspapers. There are different applications for different sizes and drags, like so, and then you can just have two different columns that look good, very well together. And after that, we've also got the shape of the edge of any basically justification. So it's ideally the justifications should not have huge differences between them. And then, such as this, it doesn't look very good because there's a bit of an overlay, there's a bit of an edge. Right now, this looks very rectangular. It's easier on the eyes, it's easier for the readers to read. So this is ideally how your text should look like. Then we've got widows and orphans. Widows and orphans basically refer to words or parts of text that stand out. So, for instance, right here, we've got word that is extended beyond a paragraph, below a paragraph. If there are one or two words at the end of a paragraph, they don't look too good. It's better to fit them elsewhere, changing the justification of the text or changing the font size or the weight. Similarly, we've got when we've got two different columns and one of the sentences ends right where the other paragraph begins. Like so, this is called an orphan. And this also doesn't look good. So it's better to fit them elsewhere or usually keep them together with the paragraph that they belong to, like so. And then this is how this looks more balanced, this looks better, and makes a lot more sense. Similarly, we're going to remove this, and you'll see how the paragraph will look much better. These are very basic tips and tricks, but they are very impactful. Now, moving on to some more technical aspects of typography, let's talk about hierarchy and scale. It's important, it's really important to uh, think about a typography scale, and then it's really important to stick to it for the whole project. Now, as you can see, we've got the title, we've got heading 2, we've got heading 3, and then we've got copy. This is applicable for from anywhere, from illustrations to articles to reports to assignments, even apart from just graphic design or branding. This, and this applies to every time you're using text anywhere. So when we talk about hierarchy or scale, it's important to keep in mind how the hierarchy goes. For instance, here we've got the title, and the font size for this title is 80. But moving on to heading 2, which is basically a primary heading size, we've got 45. And then moving on to heading 3, we've got 30. So basically what's happening is that you could say the scale of this hierarchy is somewhere around 1.5. And we're just going to stick to it. If we stick to it, it's going to look good. Yes, it's 1.5. So the copy, or basically the body of the text, will be size 20, and then headings will be size 30. Main headings, subheadings will be size 30, and main headings will be size 45, whereas the title will be 80 points. Next, let's talk a bit about justification. Justification. So, this is very basic. Most people know this is left aligned, this is center aligned, and this is right aligned justification. A few tips though, however, is that most of the languages that people use around the world, they start from the left side. You read them from left to right. So it's better most of the times to just use left justification. It's always better. It's easier on the eyes. It's easy for the layouts. It's just it works. Moving on, let's talk about some of the fundamental uh, aspects or some of the rules that you should keep in mind always when working with typography. So this one we've already gone over. The text, you have to think about form over function. Whatever you're doing, whatever design you're creating, or whatever brand identity guidelines you're creating, it's really important that the text is used in a way that it is legible for the readers. So if there's a body copy that has a lot of text, for instance, right here, it's almost always better to just use a sans serif font because it's simpler, it's easier on the eyes. Serif fonts, however, on the other hand, have their benefits. They look more impactful, they look better, they have a better personality, if you will. They should be used as headings, they should be used as in illustrations, they can be used on billboards or print media, just different applications overall. Moving on to using different font categories. So there are certain rules that you should follow when you are combining different fonts. The simplest way to go is just use different weights of the same font. So like so, here we've used Montserrat bold with a combination of open sans. Both of these are serif fonts. Both of these are simple, or we could just, simply use Montserrat. This looks good too. Nothing wrong with it. However, if you do want to experiment, maybe you could try with a serif font for the heading. So we could go with Times New Roman, a very nice serif font. This looks even better because uh, there is more of a contrast between the two fonts. However, it's almost always a better choice to go with maximum of two fonts instead of three or four or five different styles of fonts. For instance, if you look at, let's just go with a random third font. That could be, um, we could go with something that looks a bit different. This. So this is still, we've got another serif font, but it doesn't look good. So this is one of the most important rules that you need to follow when creating any sort of typography guidelines. And then we have got another rule related to hierarchy. It is important for you to divide the body of text so that it becomes more legible. People should know where their eyeline should go, where what the hierarchy is, and the easiest way to deal with hierarchy is playing with the font size as well as playing with the font weights. Just make it bold or make it bigger, and then differentiate the size of the font. If you are creating body copy, it should be much smaller in size. If you are writing something that is more important, just increase the size of that part of the text, or just, you know, make it bold so that people do notice it. And yeah, these are some of the most important tips or rules that you keep in mind whenever creating any sort of guidelines.